Today we will be looking at bankruptcy filing trends by chapter in the state of Florida. To do this, we have about a dozen charts showing bankruptcy activity in the state going back to 1990. All this filing data comes from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Now, the first chart shows total filing trends by year since 1990. During this period of time, in the 26 years, there have been 1.8 million cases filed in the state, which is the second most in the country, behind just behind California. Looking back in the early 1990s, there was around, from 91 to 95, around 45,000 cases filed per year. By the late 1990s, this was running about 75,000 per year. We had some continued increases in the early 2000s to around 90,000 per year. A little dip in 04, big jump in 05, which was the year of bankruptcy reform. That was followed by more than three-quarters drop in 2005. And then filings jumped 340% between 2006 and 2010. And actually hit their all-time peak. And Florida is one of the very few states that didn't peak in 2005, but actually 2010 was the high year. The other states were Arizona, California, and Nevada, all of which were hit very hard during the recent recession. And then since 2010, filings are down by about one half. So right now, they are about where they were, say, back in 1996, and way below where they were in the years just prior to bankruptcy reform. Now, looking at filings relative to population, Florida is actually very close to the national average. You can see that most of the Southeast has very high bankruptcy rates. The reds are over 25% above the average. The Northeast tend to have the lightest bankruptcy rates, but Florida has been right at the average over the years. Looking at it year by year, in the 1990s, Florida, the blue line here, tends to be just a little below the average or average most years. But since about 2009, the bankruptcy rate in Florida has been about 10 to 15% above the average based on population. Now, looking at the trends of Chapter 7 filings since 1990 in the state, and this follows very much the total filings, around 40,000 per year in the early 90s, jumping up to around 60,000 from the late 90s up until 2004. Big jump in 2005, more than 80% drop the next year. Another huge run up through the Great Recession, and then down more than half since 2010. So right now, filings, Chapter 7 filings in the state are about the same as what they were back in the early 1990s, although the population of the state is very much higher now. Chapter 11 filings in Florida show a big drop throughout the 1990s and really all the way up to about 2006. And certainly the pattern of the 1990s is what happened nearly everywhere, where Chapter 11's dropped off quite a bit. There was a big run-up during the Great Recession, and they dropped off again. But still, Chapter 11 filings are higher than what they were for most of the period, say from the late 90s up until the recession, where most states are actually below that level. Chapter 13 filings in the state show an interesting pattern from under 5,000 back in 1990. There was a run-up from, say, 1994 to 2003, where 10 straight years, Chapter 13's increased in the state and got up to over 25,000. Dropped off quite a bit going up to 2006, and most other states did not show such anywhere near a decline like that. Jumped up for the recession, hit peak levels in 2010, and then have fallen down about a quarter since 2010. But you can see that the rate at 20,000 Chapter 13s per year is far higher than it was, say, in the early 90s, where most states are actually about where they were in 1990. Now, the percent of cases that are Chapter 13, the national average over the years has kind of hugged the 30% line for most of this period, with some disruption before and after bankruptcy reform in 2005. In Florida, in 1990, only about 10% of cases were Chapter 13, and this ran up to nearly 30% by the year 2000. And since then, Florida has kind of followed the national pattern and is now at about 35%. So, they are one of the few states actually that are pretty close to the average now, because most states tend to be either very high in Chapter 13s or very low. There's not many in the middle. Chapter 12 filings in the state were higher during the 1990s, averaging probably 25 per year, and dropped off quite a bit, particularly from 2000 to 2004, when Chapter 12 wasn't available for a good part of this time. And since then, they've been running 20 to 30 per year most years, and most of these are in the middle district of Florida. This next chart shows the unemployment rate by quarter in Florida along the blue line compared to the national average going back to 2006. Starting in 2006, the unemployment rate was very low in Florida. You can see that it really jumped up through the Great Recession. It went up higher and stayed up there longer than the national average. And since about 2012 has been hugging right at the national average. So right now we're in the 5% range. But this gap here certainly shows some of the economic distress that occurred in the state during that time, and also a time when bankruptcies were very high. Now, this map shows the percent change since filings peaked in nationwide in September 2010. And during that time, filings nationwide are down 49%. In Florida, it's a little bit more than that. It's down about 55%. And you see most of the Southeast has had very light, much lighter than average declines, under 40%. And the biggest declines have been in the Southwest and in most of New England. Florida has been a little above average at 55%. Some difference statewide by district. In the Northern District, they're down 54%, the Middle District down 60%, and the Southern District only down 47%. Looking quarter by quarter, you can see that around 2011, the declines in Florida tend to be more than the national average, running around about 20%. 2012 to say 2014, they had lighter than average declines, and then since mid 2014 up till the present, the decline has been once again more than average. But overall, during this time, the filings are down a little bit more in Florida than most other states. The figures we just got for the third quarter show that filings were down another 19% in the state. So this year, filings are down nearly 20% in Florida compared to the first 9 months of 2015. Right now, there aren't too many states that are showing big declines of over 10%, certainly out west, parts of the Northeast, and some scattered states, but the ongoing declines in Florida are much greater than most other places. And actually, about 12 to 15 states are showing increases now. These are the red-colored states, and then the blue and yellow states tend to be ones that filings are basically flat right now. As far as the outlook for filings, it looks like there'll be under 50,000 cases filed in the state during 2016. Chapter 11s, there'll be around 500 to 600 total filed. 2017, I would expect another smaller decline with modest increases after that. But I don't see any return to the, say, 75,000 or more cases filed per year that Florida saw in the period from prior to bankruptcy reform, unless another recession hits or there's some major legislation affecting bankruptcy. Well, that concludes our look at bankruptcy filings in the state of Florida. For more statistical information and other information on bankruptcy, be sure to visit the newsroom section of the ABI website at www.abi.org.